Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the 4K Star City game tournament that happened in Richmond. It's a tournament that gathered around 129 players, I believe, so it's a significant tournament, so we're going to take a deeper look at it and see what we can learn from it. So first, the metagame breakdown is definitely not what we're used to. We always see Boba Fett dominating the field with the majority of Boba. And this time it was very different because we see Han Green being the most represented deck after Sabine. So that's definitely very impressive. Also Sabine very represented. So what I believe happened is that people kind of reacted from the Vader Blue that won the 5K tournament. So a lot of people kind of were taking against that deck. The Darth Vader Blue also saw a significant amount of play with 8% of the meta. As much as Boba Green, which is very impressive. So definitely Sabine being very overrepresented, very represented. Han Solo also, Han Solo Green specifically, really represented as well. So probably a reaction. So I don't want to be claiming that it's my fault or anything, but it's probably, of course, my videos on Han and probably had a big influence on that. Definitely people probably saw my videos and thought that it would be a good idea to bring the deck. Especially since I think that it is a deck that is relatively well positioned in the meta. Then the rest of the meta is pretty standard. Only one Aiden deck in the entire tournament, so Aiden is continuing her decline, but obviously it's the deck that won the entire thing. So actually there were three Aiden decks, my bad. There was also an Aiden Green and Aiden Red, but definitely a strong decline compared to what we've seen her, how much we've seen her in the past. She was really considered the most powerful control leader, and maybe after, but since Aiden Blue actually won the entire tournament, maybe people are gonna take a second look at it. Um, so as far as the top 16, we saw 5 people playing Sabine Green, 2 Krennic, 2 Vaders, Han Blue, Han Green, 1 Aiden Blue, a Boba Green, a Vader Blue, and a Sabine Red. So good performance, very good performance for Sabine. Went from 16% of the meta to almost a third of the top 16, so almost from 16 to 33%. So really solid performance for Sabine. Krennic also doing very well with 2 Krennic Green. We'll debrief about this at the end of the video, but definitely an interesting, a very diverse top 16 with a strong showing for Sabine is what we can observe. Something I want to say is that the amount of information that we have about this tournament is definitely not as good as the one I've seen for other big tournaments, where usually there's always a stream or videos. So far, at least as at the moment I'm making that video, there hasn't been any footage of the games being shown. Most of the time, I'm able to before I'm preparing those videos, I try to watch the replay and try to see as many games as I can in order to have a better understanding in what happened. This time that was not the case, so my level of information about the tournament is lesser than what we're used to. So just to give a bit of context. We'll start with the top 16. First, we got a deck from Noah Swift, who came out 16th of the top 16. So he's playing Sabine Green, and this is a very classic, old school Green. So we see the Echo-based Defender, we see the Guerrilla Attack Pod, as well as the and no R2D2. So it's a very classic, old school, very similar to the version I featured in my channel. Only I think main differences with my version is that he's playing 3 Rebel Assault, no 2 Rebel Assault and 3 Metal Ceremony, which is, in my opinion, so Metal Ceremony is not super strong in control, because if you even can really get rid of the ball, then you're left over with your Metal Ceremony that you cannot use, which is pretty annoying. It is pretty strong against Aggro though. But I think even stronger against Aggro is Rebel Assault. I think Rebel Assault is incredibly powerful against Aggro, so me, I would definitely play 3 Rebel Assault and 2 Metal Ceremony, because I think Metal Ceremony is a bit more situational. Um, I like everything about the deck. I have to admit I haven't played a lot of aggro recently. Haven't tried the new R2D2, no Guerrilla attack pod, no Echo based defender sort of thing. I haven't tried those new kind of like the aggro deck that the KTOD crew has been kind of brewing. I haven't tried that version by myself, so I don't have a firm opinion about whether it is good, it is better than the original or not. Um, but it definitely does see a lot of play, which leads it to have some very good results. So it's definitely something very interesting. And I think especially in the control meta, there's a lot of benefit to be playing R2D2. I think Echo-based Defender sometimes is very poorly positioned in certain matchups because of the fact that he gets killed by anything that has 3 attack. We'll talk about this in more details as we get to the list. One thing that I really love about Noah's list is the Ewing reinforcement in the sideboard. I believe that if you want to have a good matchup against control after sideboards, whenever you're playing aggro, Ewing reinforcement helps a ton. So especially if you go like, it's a really great way to completely replenish your board with a bunch of stuff. And very difficult to deal with whenever you're playing against control. So I think Ewing reinforcement is a great way to deal with versus control, and I'm really happy to see it. Only 2 copies of Wolf is a bit disappointing. I think Wolf is very good against control as well, but maybe as people have been going away from Iden and going back to Vader, it makes sense to maybe not focus so much about the anti-heal mechanic, even though Wolf is still very effective as a way to prevent your opponent from playing Vigilance over and over and over again. So very solid list, very old school, very very old school, very classic. Moving on, we got the list of Sandeep Kutumbaka. I had the chance to talk to this player after the tournament because he's the only hand green who managed to make it to the top 16, despite hand green being the second most played deck in a tournament. And his version is pretty wild. There's tons of very crazy combo like the sneak attack, home one, bring back Fleet Lieutenant from the discard pile, attack with home one right away because home one comes into play ready thanks to sneak attack, that kind of thing. Also a lot of crazy stuff like, for example, the out of aspect Luke Skywalker that can be pulled out of Ewing, the out of aspect Bounty Hunter crew that can be played to get back the Ewing back into your hand. So the way that works is you play Ewing, you find the Bounty Hunter crew, and then you can get back the Ewing back into your hand after you played it. Those kind of really high rolly stuff. So all those strategies I think are insanely powerful and can really take the opponent off guard. And when they pulled at the right moment, Cunning is also another card that can, out of aspect Cunning can really surprise the opponent if the opponent does not expect it. So there's a lot of I talked to Sandeep, and basically the 2 things that he told me is that makes a lot of sense to me. Is the first thing is that out of aspect cards, those kind of very high rolly stuff, like it's basically go big or go home, high risk, high reward strategy that is not my playstyle at all personally. Like me, I like stability, I like things that are consistent. I don't like high rolly stuff, so this is not my playstyle, but basically he decided to go for those super high risk, high reward strategies, which are insanely powerful if they work right, but they're not always going to line up perfectly for you. And for Sandeep, it did line up really well throughout the tournament, so it was successful, but he did admit that those strategies were very high risk. Another thing that he told me is that because the tournament was the deck lists were hidden, so basically people did not have open information about the deck list, it really encouraged them to go for the element of surprise and play card maybe that the opponent would not suspect to take the opponent by surprise. And I think this is really one of the things that makes that really benefit him during the tournament, because he played a lot of stuff that were completely out of ordinary. So he did say that his starting point for this list was my hand green list. You can see the skeleton of my deck is still there. You still have the Echo base, you still got the Resupply, Echo Base Defender, Greedo, Leia, Battlefield Marine. Most of the deck is still there, but there's you see also have the 2 Traitorous, which is a characteristic of my version of the deck. So pretty much the deck is still very much like looks, you can tell that there's the skeleton in my deck behind this deck. But then he basically added a lot of wild cards, things that can really take the opponent by surprise, and that really worked out very well for him. So also the out of aspect overwhelming barrage in the sideboard is also another card that can really take the opponent by surprise. So he's basically sacrificing consistency for super high rolly powerful plays that can be very powerful, and it worked out very well for him. So congratulations, and a lot of very cool innovative idea. Out of those different things, I think the thing I like the most is probably the Bounty Hunter Crew U-Wing reinforcement. I think it's a very nice piece of combo to be able to get back U-Wing reinforcement. Even if you play Bounty Hunter Crew out of aspect and get back the U-Wing reinforcement in a control matchup, it's really not that big of a deal. He can also get back Hunning with that, which is another card that I think is pretty good in some certain context. So, okay, that's a pretty interesting list with a lot of crazy thing happening. But Sandeep did a lot of playtest on his deck. He did know his list very well, and I'm sure this benefited him. And this, I think, is going to be a point I'm going to make after the end of the video. I think it's a very important point to understand about the stage of Star Wars Unlimited right now. Next, we got a Krennic list. Krennic, nobody talks about it. It's a deck that has been here since the very beginning of the game, and it's a deck that does not see a lot of representation. It never went past the second digit percentage representation in tournament, and yet it's always making top 8, top 16. It's a deck that consistently has been performing well in tournaments. Never did anything crazy, but did win. Also did win. Remember, the first Polish tournament was won by a Vader Green, and since then we've seen him trusting top 8 and top 16 in almost every tournament that I've seen. So Vader Green is definitely a deck that not enough people are talking about. I think it's a deck that is very solid. It's really good against aggro. If built properly, the problem is like there's as many versions of Vader Green that there's Vader players. Every version is different. But if built properly, it has a decent matchup against Boba. It has a good matchup versus aggro. And against control, this is where it is a little bit more complicated. But there's different strategy that goes up. For me, there's two main strategies you can use versus whenever you're playing green. Is either you decide to go for the vigilance restock package to fight control, or you can decide to overpower them. This is basically going back to my how to beat control video. And here, clearly, Phil decided to go for the overpowering option. He plays 2 Avengers, 2 Relentless, 2 Devastators, 3 Devastators. This is also a version that does not run Vader, which is kind of crazy because obviously Vader is an amazing card. So this is definitely a budget version of the deck. So obviously, I'm pretty certain that this is not a volunteer choice to not run Vader in this deck. I'm pretty sure that this is a budget choice and not something that Phil did out of his heart. And the fact that he managed to do top 14 without Vader is kind of crazy because Vader is extremely useful, especially in a control matchup. So, yeah, so interesting deck for sure. I mean, the deck is pretty much what you would expect from a Vader Green, but obviously the lack of Vader definitely probably harmed the deck, but it worked out for Phil anyway. So congratulations to him. It's definitely a huge performance to be able to pull a top 16 with this deck without Vader. That is definitely an accomplishment. And also it shows that it's not really about the deck, it's about the pilot. If you play well, if you know how to play well, you the deck is more important than the pilot. Moving on, we got Addison Hudson with a green Sabine. This version closer to what we've seen from the new school kind of version of the deck. Here plays all 3 Medal of Ceremony and all 3 Rebel Assault to really help out in the aggro matchup. And the rest of the deck is pretty much what you would expect. So once again, you see Echo-based Defender being removed. So I would say that Echo-based Defender, as good as this card is in a vacuum, is relatively poorly positioned in the meta because it doesn't work well versus the Battlefield Marine, the Sabine, and all that. So people have been starting to remove it out of their deck. And I don't know if it's the definitive right thing to do, but it is definitely something that we've seen from aggro players doing Also, we see the disappearance of Gary Attack Pod. A lot of people think the card is too slow and too easy to answer. And instead, we've seen the appearance of cards that are difficult to deal with because of a lot of HP. So we see R2-D2, Bright Hope, and even Akbar, in this case, making an appearance in the list. Sometimes can be very, if you can kill something with Akbar, the card is obviously very good. The problem is you're not always going to be able to kill something. Only 2 copies of Spectral Soldiers, which I'm a little bit surprised about. Spectral Soldiers is one of the best answer versus Chilson, which we've seen more and more play. But definitely a situational card. And then once again we see Zeb going into the sideboard in combination with ECL, very very good in the mirror match. The Dodonas also very good, strong in the mirror match. It really sounds like a list that has been carved for the mirror match. We see the 3 Rebel Assault, 3 Metal Ceremonies with the Dodonas, the Akbar, the Bright Hope. All this is very strong in the mirror of Aggro. So maybe that's like a good direction for the deck to take. And we also 3 copies of Fang Fighters. I think Fang Fighters is very well positioned in the current meta. It deals with Traitorous, and it also deals with the I forgot the name, the Entrench, which we're seeing from the control players. So overall, a very good list. So we'll move on now to the next one. Then we got Rousser Lapar, and another deck that seems to be working consistently well is the Luke Green. I think it's now well defined and well agreed upon that Luke Green is indeed the best version of Luke, and I think Dispatcher is the main reason for this. And you can see here pretty traditional list. There's a couple of interesting things in there, like for example, it's I'm trying to find things that are out of the ordinary, but no, it's a pretty classic list, I would say. Has the redemption, the home ones. Yeah, it's very classic. I guess the only main originality is the Echo base instead of ECL. I've personally always been a fan of ECL in the Luke deck, but recently Luke players have been once again going away from ECL and focusing on getting a 30 HP base instead. And I feel like it's been working pretty well for them. So ECL once again see less and less play. A sideboard that is very anti-aggro. We see 3 Yularen, 3 Star Vipers, and 2 Star Vipers and 2 Escort Skiff, which is an excellent card against aggro. A little bit of anti-control, just 1 copy of Restock. I have no idea how impactful that 1 copy of Restock was in the deck. And then 2 Regional Governor, probably against Han and probably against Control as well. So and Luke Green keeps on getting wins, keeps on pulling out performances despite not seeing a very high amount of representation in the different decks. Next we got another Krennic, but this Krennic is very different from the classic Krennic midrange that we've seen previously, and it is a much more control focus. It doesn't play a lot of unit, as you can see. It plays the Entrench, it plays the 3 copies of Super Laser Blast, the Vigilances, and even the Restock. So 2 Restock in the main deck. So it is pre-sided versus Control. And I think a lot of players have decided to have their anti-control cards in their main deck, because I think my opinion is that if your plan against Control is to win against Control by mill with Vigilance and Restock, I think you should play those in the main deck. And the reason is because if you're fighting against Control and the game is really going to be decided on Vigilances, it's very likely that there's only going to be 1 game. So you're basically playing a best of 1. So in that case, you want to have those in the main deck, because if you've lost game 1, having those cards in the sideboard is not really going to help out, because how likely is you're going to be able to draw those cards on time. So be able to finish the game on time. So another crazy thing is only 2 copies of Overwhelming Barrage, which is obviously one of the best cards in the game. So shocking to only see 2 copies of it, but in this deck it does make a little bit of sense, because as you can see, this deck is not really playing a lot of units. So obviously in this case Barrage is going to become a little bit more situational than it is in a traditional deck. We'll also see 1 copy of Mercenary Company, Probably as, once again, try to have like different options. Only 2 copies of Shalsen. Shalsen, not super consistent in the deck. There's a lot of non-blue card in this deck, so the Vaders, obviously, the Devastator for the late game, the Avengers. In the sideboard, there's some out of aspect, no good to me dead. I wonder in what matchup does he bring this one. And then we'll see Search Your Feelings. The Search Your Feeling toolbox here, it's a 1-1-1-1 sideboard. Actually, we're not seeing all the sideboard cards here. Oh, never mind, we're seeing all of them. So yeah, Search Your Feelings, because there's like a huge toolbox of different of singleton cards, which is very interesting. I think Search it almost looks like a Wish sideboard. I don't know if you play Magic, you know there's a card called Burning Wish or Living Wish card that can basically that can tutor cards into sideboards, and you see those kind of sideboard in those decks. Obviously, this kind of card do not exist currently in Star Wars Unlimited, but it almost looked like a sideboard like this. Anyway, so you Search for Feelings, toolbox probably for the control mirror to find those vigilances, to find those restock. It's really, really strong in a mirror of control. Search Your Feelings, which really I was not expecting Search Your Feelings to be a major player in this first set, but it turns out that the meta is so incredibly crazy that it happens to be quite good, to be quite useful. So, really interesting deck, kind of an hybrid between the Krennic mid-range and the Vader / Iden super hard control decks, and looks like it's been working pretty well for him. Moving on, we got Paul Hever with his Han Blue, and so I've heard a lot of discussion previously about people asking me what do I think about Han Blue. And if you're playing Han Blue, like sort of the mid-range Han Blue, like basically you're playing Han Green, but instead of playing green card, you're playing blue card, so you're playing Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan instead of the Skirmisher, Luke Skywalker instead of the U-Wing, Yoda instead of the Echo-based Defender. Then I'm not a big fan of Han Blue because I think Han Green is superior than Han Blue in every possible way. In every tool that Han Blue has, Han Green has a better version of that tool. For example, I think as a 4-drop, Bright Hope is much better than Kanan. As a 3-drop, I think Echo-based Defender is better than Yoda. I guess those is a bit more debatable, but let's go for the obvious ones. The obvious one is U-Wing is better than Luke. Like U-Wing is in a U-Wing deck is really the best card of your deck. Luke is very strong, don't get me wrong, but I think U-Wing is better. Like obviously Battlefield Marine is much stronger than Arc 170 and all that. So I believe overall, and also I think the most important point, I think the only blue card is better, like at a cost for cost, is going to be Obi-Wan. I think Obi-Wan is better than Skirmisher. But outside of this, I think every time you think about a blue card, I think the green equivalent is better. And more importantly, I think that as blue you are missing Resupply, which in my opinion is the second best card in the deck. In Han Green, Resupply is the second best card after U-Wing. It's really an incredibly powerful card. Games where you have Resupply versus game where you don't, it's a huge difference maker. Like, if I could have Resupply in all my hands, like it would make Han would be by far the best deck in the game. Obviously that would be cheating, but anyway. The point I'm trying to make is that Resupply is an incredible card, and missing that is a big deal. So with all that being said, this is basically on the spectrum of like I'm trying to translate the green and translating into blue. But this deck is very different. This deck is not a mid-range deck. I mean, it looks like a mid-range deck, it smells like a mid-range deck, but it is not a mid-range deck. It has the Vigilance Restock package. It plays 3 Repair, 3 Make the Opening, 3 Vanquishes, 3 Takedowns, 2 Waylays. It's a much more control-y deck than the Han Green. It is basically a control hand list. Like, yes, it plays some big top ends, but the rest of the deck is pretty much events. There's a few units here and there, but it's not a deck that is really able to take on the aggression. I mean, yes, you got Falcon, but Falcon is more going to be like an anti... In this deck, it's more going to be an anti-space removal. It doesn't have Surprise Strike, for example, so it has, like, it doesn't have the Battlefield Marine that can really put the pressure early on. it's really a very different deck than Hand Green. And whether this is better than Hand Green or whether this is worse, I cannot tell you that because I've never played this deck. I tried some blue version of Han, but those were, as I said, very mid-rangey Han decks. This is a very control deck, so I cannot really tell you how strong this deck is because I've never played with it. But obviously, strong performance here in this tournament. Does that mean this deck is better? No, it's only a single performance. Once again, be very careful about single performance this tournament. What I can say though is that it's very metagamed. Like it's a deck that has been built to beat a specific meta. It's very obvious when you see Vision's Restock in the main deck with the Spark of Rebellion. That's for the control matchups. You get the a lot of anti-aggro cards like Shoot First, Repair in the main deck. So it plays a lot of sideboard cards in the main deck. So is what I was saying about the different ways of building decks. There are decks that are inherently powerful when you're trying to build a deck that is inherently powerful because it has strong synergy, and I think Hand Grain is a very good example for this. This is not the same deck building approach. It's a completely different deck building approach. It's basically saying, okay, I'm going to be playing a deck that counters the meta. I'm going to be playing everything that counters the meta. I'm going to give me all the best card against Boba, make the opponent 3 make an opening main deck, 3 vanquish in the main deck. I want to beat Boba. I want to beat those control deck. Give me the vanquishes. Give me the restock. Give me the Spark of Rebellion. I'm gonna beat Aggro. Give me the repair. Give me the shoot first. Give me the Yodas. Give me the Obi-Wans. Also Vigilance to some extent. So here's and the only real synergies here with Han that I see is basically just I also play 3 Luke and 2 Han that I can play 2 turn earlier because of Han's ability. But it is a very meta-gamed deck. It's not a deck that is really fully utilizing the power of Han. So it's a completely different deck building approach that I was saying. And I don't know if this deck is good. I'll definitely have to try it out. But it's definitely a very different approach. And obviously, congratulations for Paul for making top 10 with this sweet deck. Then we got Blog Edmondson at 9th position. So once again, a very similar list that we saw earlier. So we know it's basically the same list. Right? It's card by card the same list that we've seen above. Try to utilize this. Try to be better into the mirror of Aggro. So. Not much to say about it. It's very much the same list. Now we go into the top 8. And first, we got John Tada. So it's the same guys. It's the same crew. They basically play together, they play test together, and they agree on what deck they're going to play. So those players are obviously very good at the game. But obviously, since they're a few of them and they all kind of agree on playing the same deck, then they show up the tournament and then they do well. You see them well represented in top 16. So yeah, it's the same deck. It's the anti-control, basically well built for the aggro mirror, and that approach have worked out pretty well for him. So that was very well done. So moving on, then we got the Ryan decreases. So Ryan is playing Vader Green, which is a deck that it's impressive that this deck has managed to do top 7 despite all the aggro decks that we've seen in the tournaments. I don't know if he managed to dodge the matchup or if he made some modification that basically makes the matchup a lot better. His version has a few differences that help against aggro. Obviously the 5 extra HP base on the command center, definitely helpful. Still plays the Star Viper despite that. Also, the TIE Fighter is actually pretty good against aggro whenever you play Vader, because what you can do is you can go turn 1 TIE Fighter, then ping with the Vader, and then you can attack with Vader and kill an A-Wing. So it's not ideal, but one of the weaknesses of Vader is that it's very vulnerable in space early on in the game. And that's why we play the Star Vipers. But the TIE Fighter helps a little bit with that, especially in this deck where you get to play the unit turn 1 and ping on the same turn. I used to play TIE Fighter in my Vader decks to help with that, and I had some good success with it. So obviously the fact that you're paying a 30 HP base, it is a big cost to pay for Vader for multiple reasons. The first reason is you can't go for the turn 3 Vader anymore, because not like this is a combo that is like super important, but it is something that you are sacrificing. Not being, I would say that ECL Super Laser Technician plus ping is a pretty classic powerful play with Vader that you can't do anymore. Also, Fire Spray becomes a lot more difficult to deal with because normally with an ECL Vader you can one-shot Fire Spray with TIE Interceptors and Ruthless Raider. You can't do that anymore with this deck. So there's definitely like a high cost to be paid for playing Command Center, but the 5 extra HP is probably so incredibly relevant in against aggro that it's well worth the sacrifice. So I still need to playtest with Vader Command Center. I haven't personally played a lot with it, and I would love to see how it performs. But definitely very interesting. It is something that once again we're seeing ECL see less and less play. People are starting to realize that 5 HP is worth a lot in this game, and even ECL. Basically now you see ECL disappearing from almost every list excepted Boba and forgot the name and Sabine. Pretty much all the other green decks seems to be slowly moving away from ECL, which I found it to be quite incredible. Not something I could have predicted a few months ago, that's for sure. So as you can see, he's also playing less top end, probably to improve the aggro matchup, but he still has some pretty good odds to find them because he has 2 copies of Recruit, so maybe that helps with that. As for the sideboard, he has clearly decided to go for the overpowering approach, so what I was describing into how to beat control, and there he went for Relentless combined with the Emperor's Legion in order to beat control, and maybe it worked out. Maybe that worked out pretty well for him. In any case, I think this combination of Emperor's Legion, Relentless, incredibly powerful against those massive control play. And here we're seeing it making a major performance in tournament, so that's good. That's good to see. Okay, another aggro deck, but this time a little bit different from the other one. We're seeing Guerrilla Attack Pod being played again. Once again, the U-Wing reinforcement in the sideboard, which I think helps tremendously against control. And the rest of the deck, once again, we'll see the Echo-based Defender not seeing play anymore in favor of like R2D2, and yeah, the rest of the deck makes sense. So, Guerrilla Attack Pod, is it a good card? Is it a bad card? It does see play. It does see play, and it does still perform well. Moving on to the list is Elizabeth's Sprinkle with top 16 performance with Vader Blue. What can I say? It's it's pretty much the very similar to the deck that won the 5K tournament in Orlando. It is the Vader Control deck. I think the deck is fairly similar. There's a couple of interesting stuff. The Force Lightning as potentially a late game card once Vader's out, and can also be used on Super Laser Technician to kill Super Laser Technician without him triggering its effect, which I think can be very effective. We once again see I Am Your Father making an appearance. This card has not disappeared from the deck. Bounty Hunter Crew making it as a one-of, I think very good into the mirror. I have to say this deck is not super well equipped for the mirror because only 3 Vigilances, no restock in the main. Oh no, never mind. There's one restock. Okay, and it has the Bounty Hunter Crews to get back Vigilances in restock. So yeah, it has some good tools. Never mind. And very surprised to see more Avengers than Palpatine. I personally am very high on Palpatine. I think Palpatine is the best 8-drop in the game. So every time I see less than 3 Palpatine in the control deck, I don't like that. I really think Palpatine is amazing. The sideboard, we got a lot of anti-control cards, Spark of Rebellions, Search My Feelings, even see Forced Surrender, and a Bombing Run maybe for the element of surprise against aggro. Solid list, we already know this from the 5K tournament, it's not so different. Like the Bounty Hunter Crew, so Bounty Hunter Crew out of aspect was also part of my How to Beat Control video. I also explain how effective this card is in the Mirror of Control. And it's definitely, if you're going for the meal strategy, it's definitely a card that I would definitely consider playing. Now let's take a look at the top 4. Then we got Garrett Stidley with his Sabine Red, and his Sabine Red is very interesting. There's a lot of crazy stuff in it. So basically, on the Sabine Red, there's basically two different versions. There is the version that plays 4 cars, I believe in, and plays a lot of heroic units. And then there's the version that plays that doesn't play 4 cars, I believe in, and really capitalize on a lot of red units. So capitalize on Sol Guerrera, plays all the open fires, the partisan insurgent, and all that good stuff. What is fun about this deck is that it does both. It says, I'm going to go for Sol Guerrera, I'm going to go for open fire, I'm going to go for all those single red cards, and then I'm still going to play 4 cars I believe in. Which, to me, is kind of weird, because it's going to make 4 cars I believe very, very weak. So, I don't know. I would love to interview that player and know how well 4 cars I believe in performed in his deck, because he's playing a crazy amount of non-heroic cards. He's on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 16 non-heroic card. So 16 non-heroic card out of 50 cards. That means that basically his 4 cars I believe in only deal 3 damage, between 3 damage on average, like 3 damage and sometimes less on average, and that really makes the card a lot worse. So yeah, I don't know exactly how it went on with this, but yeah, that's basically what I decided to do. He decided to go and go. With that being said, of course, Sol Guerrera is really a strong card. I think the only reason why you haven't seen this card a lot because double red Sabine has not really seen a lot of play, and there's as I said earlier, there's a version that doesn't play any of the red card. Surprised that only 2 copies of K2SO is very surprising to me. I think K2SO is an incredible card and should be an absolute no-brainer 3 ofs in any Sabine deck. So really would like to, I really wonder why there's only 2 copies of K2SO in this deck. Also, Precision Fire is also a very interesting take. It's a card that was very hyped when it was first spoiled, but then players find it to be a little bit too inconsistent because it really has to target a trooper to really be good. But maybe it worked out pretty well against the Shalsen. So this is by far the weirdest list out of the top 16. And this one did top 4, so huge performance here. In the sideboard we see the Power Failure, probably a great counter to Shalsen. Overall, Aggression is an incredibly powerful card. I think Double Red Sabine is a deck that is pretty powerful. Aggression is, in my opinion, the strongest double aspect card in the game. I know it's a wild take after we see how crazy Vigilance has been lately, but I think in a vacuum, once again, not considering the meta, not considering all the decks you can build around it, in a vacuum, I think Aggression is the strongest double aspect card in the game. It's incredibly, incredibly powerful, and especially against Control, you can get rid of the Entrench, kill something and tap something. Incredibly flexible. All 4 modes are very relevant. It's a very, very powerful card. So it's a strong reason to be playing Sabine Red, even though the deck has not really pulled out the performances, because you're really sacrificing a lot for playing those aggression, unfortunately. And the other double red cards are not really that amazing, unfortunately. I mean, Sol Guerrera is fine. Anyway, interesting deck, and we're now going into the next list. Is going to be Andrew Wiggs and his 3rd position with Vader Grain. And this is a very similar version than what I'm running. Like, I think the Devastator, if you swap out the Devastator and the Snowtroopers, but those are in my sideboard, yeah, it's very, and I play a couple of Bombing Run in the main deck, so basically my deck is almost it's almost the same 60 cards. It's just that there's different organization between the main and the side. And the only major difference between my version and his is because he plays Command Center and I play Energy Conversion Lab. That's the only major difference. But other than this, it's pretty much the same list as I'm playing. So obviously I think very highly of it. I think it's a very powerful list. It has this weakness against Aggro, and once again I wonder if this Command Center has basically fixed the aggro matchup for Vader. Maybe it did. And if that's the case, then I would definitely like to give it another shot and see how it impacts the other. The other. And this is really where it's a good example of where the emotions, right, kind of can affect the way you build decks. Because I always have this very strong emotion out of Energy Conversion Lab being so good with Super Laser Technician, especially to pull the Vader turn 3 play. since it's kind of a combo that I invented and stuff. So I was kind of very emotionally invested in that. And something I explained in my deck building videos is that sometimes emotions can prevent you from making the right decision. And maybe for all this time I've been kind of feeling very strongly about this thing. I mean, obviously there were other reasons why I love ECL, especially against Boba, being able to ECL with Earth Raiders and Emperor Interceptors into a fire spray, stuff like this. But then maybe I felt a bit too strongly about it, and maybe I should have been more open-minded and try a command center to try to fix the aggro matchup. And so this is something to learn, is to not be too emotionally invested in certain building decision you make, and be open-minded to change. And here he decided to go command center, and it works out great for Andrew, as he made a third position here with his deck, despite a super hostile environment for Vader. Like 16% of the meta playing Sabine Green, and I think more than 20% of the meta playing Sabine, if you take into account the Sabine Yellow. That is a very, very strong performance here for this deck. So really glad to see, because it's a deck that I love. It's it's the first deck I won a tournament with, so it's really a deck that I really love. So yeah, great performance from Andrew. Now we're going to the top 2, and obviously this would not be a top 16 of Star Wars Unlimited if we didn't have at least one a Boba Green by far. A huge counter performance here for Boba. But I think it's not so much related to the fact that Boba is bad, but rather that Boba was very underrepresented. So what can we say about this Boba Green? So yeah, I think Boba Green did not see as much play in this tournament as it usually does. But even then, even with like third most represented deck in the game, only one Boba Green in top 16 is not a great performance. So I would be curious to know, and this was a very favorable meta for Sabine, because loads of Sabine, loads of Han, so this was a very, very favorable meta for Boba, because Boba has a great matchup into those two decks. One of my theory, once again, I haven't seen any of the games, so I can't really tell exactly what happened, but my theory about this is that the Boba have changed their decks a lot in order to be able to fight the control decks, and as a result, they made their Sabine matchup weaker. Something you have to understand is that Boba is very strong against Sabine as long as it's playing the No Good To Me Dead, as long as it's playing the Constant Star Viper, as long as it's playing the Surprise Strike or the Gurmoran Guards or whatever anti-aggro card. Once you stop playing those cards, the matchup is not as good as great anymore. So it is something to keep in mind. So what about this specific version? So in this specific version, there's a couple of interesting things. First of all, it is not playing Crafty Smuggler, which I think is very interesting, because Crafty Smuggler, maybe it is not so well positioned in the current meta, because it's not great against aggro, because it doesn't have 3 attacks and gets one-shot by Sabine. It's a great target for Make an Opening, so it's not so great against Make an Opening. I think if you are playing against Control, you prefer to play Seasoned Troll Trooper. And if you're playing as aggro, you prefer to play Viper Probe Droid or Greedo to be able to one-shot the enemy 3 health units. So I think it's a clever choice. Other than this, it's a pretty classic version. The only major difference is the Gamera Guards. So we had some players playing Gamera Guards in the Richmond during the Orlando tournaments. But here in this case, I felt like the Gamera but they were playing Gamera Guard instead of Star Viper, and I was a bit critical to this. I was like, I personally prefer Star Viper than Gamera Guards in Boba, simply because I think one of the big weaknesses of Boba is early game space. If you don't find a 7th speed defender, you're in big trouble, and that's the reason why you placed Star Viper, is because then you got basically twice more answers in space in the early stage of the game, which can be sometimes a problem for Boba into the aggro matchup. And but here in this case, he's playing Star Viper alongside Gamera Guards, which really covers them on the ground and in space against aggro, which I think is very, very good if you expect a lot of aggro. And he got rewarded for it, because obviously the meta was super aggro focused. So obviously, and against Control, so his list as the main deck is relatively weak against control. Like his list is not the best against control, at least out of the main deck. But he fixes with the sideboard by playing Relentless, Devastator, 3 out of aspect Spark of Rebellion. Spark of Rebellion, tons of play, see tons of play against control across the board, and also the Confiscate to get rid of the Entrench, which is one of the best counter that control has against Fed's Fire Spray. So overall, basically the plan is to be very strong against aggro out of the main deck and have the anti-control card in the sideboard. So probably worked out for him. So worked out very well for him with second place. So well done by Curtis about his performance. I think the deck is looks pretty solid. We see No Good to Me Dead. We saw less and less No Good to Me Dead in main deck, but here I think No Good to Me Dead went back into the deck because it's too good against aggro, but more importantly, it's very good against Han. So I think Boba was very, very well represented. Was very well positioned in the meta, and the only explanation I have for them not doing so well in this tournament is because maybe the Boba players went a little bit too far in making their deck, in building their deck against control, and kind of forgot about the aggro matchup and kind of lost that way. Because yes, you have a good matchup against aggro, but you still need to play those cards. You still need to be respecting the matchup, because Sabine, as soon as it's not respected, as soon as you're not playing a certain set of cards, then very small changes can make a huge difference. Last but not least, we got our top 1 contender, and we got Jordan Hunning playing the Iden Blue. So, what can I say about this? First of all, it's very funny because I was actually playtesting versus a guy who is very good with Idens. This was one of the first player, I think the first player to really build this Iden. I call them the Iden Dominatrix deck, the Iden full control list. And he did top 10 in the London tournament, so very early on he had some some performances with this deck. And he actually told me a few days before this tournament, that Iden Blue was a very strong deck. And well, not even a few days after he says that, here you go, Jordan Hunning does top 1 performance. Obviously, completely different player, but the point was there that Iden Blue is a thing, and it's a powerful thing. So basically, the idea is that it's pretty much the same deck as the Iden Dominatrix that I show on my channel, but obviously it replaced the red and try to play more anti-control tech in the main deck. So this deck is the most anti-control you can ever be. At least in the vigilance milling shenanigan, it has the 3 vigilance in the main deck, obviously, the 2 restock, the 3 Search Your Feelings to search for either restock or vigilance, the Spark of Rebellion to discard your opponent vigilance. The only way you can make this deck even more anti-control is by adding the Bounty Hunter crew and maybe a 3rd copy of restock. And the Bounty Hunter crew, it does have them in the sideboard. So he's extremely, it's an understatement to say that he's extremely well equipped for the control mirror. So against Boba, basically this deck has all the weapons that all the strong weapons that Iden Red has against Boba. It does have them. So the power of the dark side, the Make an Opening, the Vanquishes, the Entrench, the Super Laser Blast, all those cards, all the same. He does have them. That's the way he deals with control. That's the way, sorry, he deals with Boba. Open Fire, basically red does not really give you great tool versus Boba. It gives you Open Fire, not great. False Choke is a bit better. It's good against Boba unit, I guess, but that's about it. And then I think the only card that is very strong against Boba as red that you're missing out on is Palpatine. Palpatine is an incredible card against Boba because it one-shots Fire Spray, which is huge. But this deck has other ways to deal with Fire Spray. 3 Vanquishes, 3 Entrench, you should be fine. Anyway. And then so you're not really getting so much against Boba. So the matchup where the red matters a lot is against aggro. I think against aggro you're really missing out on the red because notably on the famous like skip your turn 1 and then play a removal on turn 2 with the initiative, You can do this with this deck, but only with Power of the Dark Side. So if you don't find a Power of the Dark Side, in the early game can get out of hand pretty quick. Unless you get a Child Send, but then the Child Send comes only 2 turns after, so you have time to take a little bit of beating between that. One of the advantages that red gives you is like it gives you open fire and full stroke that really helps you in the early stage of the game to kind of like stabilize right at the gate. So, but it does compensate this by having a better Child Send. So this Child Send is going to be 6/6 all the time. It's going to be super consistent because you play mono blue, and the Vigilance is going to be at 4 resources instead of 6, which is a big deal against aggro. Vigilances, and this is not new by the way, I've said this from the very moment, I think like way before the game was released, I said Vigilance is the best card, the best anti-aggro card in the game. The only problem is like double blue is not great. This is kind of what was my take back in the days, and I obviously still believe this. I still believe Vigilance at 4 is the best anti-aggro card in the game by far. And here you can even search them with Search Your Feelings to get even more copies of it when it needs to be in the later state of the game. So apparently the deck does very well against aggro. That's what the player was saying after his interview. I watched an interview of the player by Tower Number 9, and you should definitely check it out if you haven't. It's a bit long, 45 minutes on one deck, but if you want to know more and know everything there is to know about this deck, then you definitely should check it out. And basically, I think this deck has this very so it's not worse than Addison Red against Boba. It's better than Addison Red against Control, and against aggro it has some give and takes. Like yes, it doesn't have the early removal spell, but it does have the better Vigilances. So all in all, it seems to be a very solid deck. We'll see on the long run which one prevails. Is it the Addison Red going to prevail? Is it the Addison Blue? But definitely another option, and this is one of the advantages that Addison has over Vader. So we were basically debating early on whether Addison was going to be the full out control that was going to dominate the meta, or was it going to be Vader? And one of the major advantages that Addison has over Vader is that Addison can be played in a wide variety of colors. You can play Addison Green, you can play Addison Blue, you can play Addison Red and still remain full control. And even some people play Addison Yellow as full control. Vader, really, if you want to play a full control list, Vader Blue is the only way to go about it, because blue is the quintessential color that you need for this deck to work. So it does give an advantage to Addison in that sense. One thing that I was really wondering, and something I was talking about the Vader deck, is one of the advantages of the Vader deck is that Vader can close out game much faster than Addison does. Addison is much more hard control, very slow deck. And I wonder how many games went to time and how Jordan was able to manage this kind of time problem that he probably, because this is a deck that takes a lot longer to kill. Anyway, I just want to say that being able to pilot a deck like this and win a tournament with a deck like this is a huge performance, because the physical games are going to be super long. A lot of games are going to go to time, and that is definitely something that must be extremely exhausting as a player. So huge performance from him, and congratulations for coming out with this deck and proving us that double blue can win tournaments. So it's pretty awesome. So what kind of learnings that we have? So first of all, before going into a bit more details in the learning, there's 2 things I want to say. The first thing is the meta is awesome. You guys have to understand that this meta is awesome. The amount of decks that are super playable and are super powerful, the amount of decks that are able to perform and can win tournaments is incredibly high, is staggeringly high. There's so many different decks, and those decks are very radically different from one another, and all those decks can win. All decks can do very well. There's a wide amount of different leaders that can win. Yes, green is the best color, but I would say that there's a lot of other color combinations that can work as well. So the meta is incredibly diverse. I don't think even the developers predicted the meta to be so diverse. So that's great for the game. a lot of decks can perform well. And the second thing I want to say is the pilot is more important than the deck. We've seen a lot of decks. It's a bit chaotic, right? There's a lot of decks, and it's sometimes hard to determine is the deck really good, or is the player got lucky, or is the player just really good? And we are still at the early stage of the game. People are still learning the game, and the pilot matters way more than the deck. So always take this into account whenever you are selecting your deck and whenever you are trying to learn from the tournament performances. That there's a big grain of salt is the pilot matters more than the deck. Because people are still learning Star Wars Unlimited. Star Wars Unlimited is a very skill-intensive game, much more skill-intensive than Magic the Gathering, in my opinion, than other card games that at least the one that I've played, because there's tons of decision-making lines that do not exist in Magic, for example. So this is something to take into account as well, is that the deck matters more, the player matters more than the deck. So what are the learning for this tournament? So less Boba and more control. Aggro loves it. Aggro really benefits a lot from less Boba players seeing play and more control player coming into play. Yes, you can kind of carve your control deck to have a decent matchup against aggro, but overall those kind of hard control decks don't seem to be performing particularly well against aggro, especially the Vaders, the Vader Blue. I think there were a lot of Vader Blue in the tournament. It was the most represented. There was as many Vader Blue as there were Bobas, and this really benefited aggro a lot. And I think this is probably the main explanation on why aggro did so well in this tournament. The second big learning is that Han was there. So Han is the second most represented in there. I can't believe that Han Green so quickly went from a deck that was almost seeing no play to become the second most represented deck in the tournament. So as I said, I think there's a strong possibility it's due to my videos. But I think a lot of people are discovering about the deck, learning about this deck, and really loving the deck because it's such a fun deck to play. Unfortunately, this deck has really underperformed because from the second most played deck in the tournament, only one made it to the top 16 as far as Han Green is concerned. So, what can we say from this? I'm not surprised by this. And the reason why I'm not surprised is because Han is an extremely difficult deck to play. It's by far the most difficult deck to play. So if there's a bunch of people who saw Han was great, watched a couple of my videos, and then went on the Han adventures and tried to win with Han without proper training, things probably didn't go very well for them because it's such a hard deck to play. So I just would like to say to all those players, hang on, keep at it, keep working on it, keep playing it, and you will understand soon why this deck is so good. Another thing as well is that I have to admit that the latest version, the deck that I've shown to the public of my Han Green was relatively weak to aggro. During the TTI tournament, I did not encounter a single aggro, and I did very well, and I won this tournament. I think that if people are trying to build a control deck, I've made some adjustment lately, to make Han Green better against aggro. And I think that you should make those adjustments, maybe not those exact adjustments, but maybe you should try to take into account and try to adjust the aggro matchup, because the aggro matchup is not so good on that version. On my corrected version, the aggro matchup is a lot better, though. I made some changes that really helps in the matchup, and I think that a lot of players were simply playing with maybe my version or maybe some other version that were even worse, some version with ECL that were even weak against aggro. So you had to really respect aggro and adjust. I think this is probably one of the big explanation. Don't forget about Krennic and Vader. Krennic and Vader, especially Vader, they're still there. They're still performing well. Something that came out of the interview as well from the Iden Blue players, the person who won the tournament, is that he did very poorly. He saw that he had a bad matchup versus Vader Green. So Vader Green, Krennic Green, but also Palpatine are decks that I think will perform very well versus those hard control decks that are going to come out. So consider playing them, but then you really have to have a plan versus aggro if you're playing those decks. And for example, maybe playing Command Center over Energy Conversion Lab is the way to go. Which brings me to my last point, is that ECL is increasingly dismissed. We're seeing less and less ECL So I don't know how many ECL have we got in this top 16. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, not as much as usual. And most of those ECLs were effectively, most of those ECLs were basically aggro players. So ECL not as good as it used to be. People are dismissing ECL more and more, and that's another thing we can learn from this tournament. Anyway, this was a long video. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to. There's just a lot of interesting things to say, I feel like. So feel free, if I missed anything, feel free to, if you are one of those players who are playing those decks, feel free to add up to or to answer what I'm saying in the video. And if you like that content, please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time.